The 2026 governor's race seeing developments as Republican Mike Lawler says he won't be running. With no Republican challenger for Governor Hochul yet, we'll hear from a political expert on the developing outlook. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Jamie DeLine. Hudson Valley Congressman Mike Lawler was expected to announce his run for governor. Instead, he'll be seeking re-election to Congress. This change having ripple effects when it comes to other Republican gubernatorial prospects. Take a look. Instead of campaigning for governor, Republican Congressman Mike Lawler will be running for his current job in next year's midterm elections. He stated, quote, "While I fundamentally believe I am best positioned to take on Kathy Hochul and offer New Yorkers a real choice for governor, I have made the decision to run for re-election to the House and continue the important work I've been doing over the past 2.5 years. Governor Kathy Hochul, who is seeking re-election, was asked by reporters about Lawler's decision.
Apparently he doesn't have the courage to stand up to me or to Donald Trump. I'm not surprised.
While there's currently no Republican challenger, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is considering a run. She issued a statement on Wednesday saying, quote, "I will make a final decision and announcement after this year's November election, which we are all focused on." Joining us now to give additional insight into this change to the governor's race is Morgan Hook. He's a partner at Blue Jacket Strategies. Morgan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So were you surprised by Mike Lawler's decision, his announcement that he made this week?
I am a little bit surprised by it, only in that he seemed very serious about running for governor, and I actually think he has a better chance of winning governor in New York State than certainly than Elise Stefanik and probably any of the other candidates that Republicans could put out there. But he very clearly was pressured by the party and pressured by the president to stay in his congressional district. And I think we expect his congressional district to be one of the most highly competitive, certainly in New York, if not around the country. So I'm sure he felt that pressure and he sort of bowed to it. And, you know, he took his shots as he walked out the door and said Elise needs to make her decision sooner than whenever she wants to. But yeah, I mean, it was mildly surprising, I think.
Can you talk about what goes on behind the scenes from a strategy perspective when someone is deciding whether or not to run for governor or run for any position for that matter?
Sure. So unfortunately, I think one of the biggest things that candidates are thinking about is how much money can they raise. Money has become such a critical part of any race you're running. I was talking to a candidate for a different office in a different state just last week, and this candidate hadn't launched yet, but it was the whole initial conversation was about how much money can you raise, who can you tap into, where can you get the call time to raise these dollars, and it's sort of this ugly cycle that happens where it's when you launch a campaign, like for example, if you're running for Congress. You launch a campaign, one of the first questions you get asked by the press and the media, and frankly by insiders as well, and other people who you're trying to raise money from is, well, how much money do you have? And people want to give money to a winning campaign, and they want to give money to a legitimate campaign, and the way you prove legitimacy is by having money. So it is the first and last question that these campaigns ask themselves before they run. Now, I think that Mike Lawler wouldn't have had any problem raising money. I think what their considerations were at this point were a lot more about what I first mentioned, which is the pressure that he was getting from the party, the pressure that he was getting from Donald Trump, the pressure, I think, frankly, to clear the path for Elise Stefanik, which is clearly the preferred choice of the Republicans and of the president. So I think that's where his decision-making was coming in, because I think he probably looked at himself as a viable candidate, and he was. So why would you step down? Why would you step aside? It's clearly something he wanted to do. He was viable. He can raise the money. So then some other factor has to come into it, and that's where I believe like it's Donald Trump putting his thumb on the scales and basically forcing him to stay in his congressional race.
Now I know Congresswoman Elise Stefanik said she'll make a decision after the November elections. Those are local races.
Sure.
Why wait until November? Is it because of money, like you mentioned, the funding, gaining support?
So I actually think, and I'll take a step back from her specifically and talk about this more generally. So in her position, again, a big part of when you're running a campaign is how can we get press attention? How can we drive the narrative and all of those kinds of cliches? And as long as she is not an announced candidate, she commands more interest. You know, I've had these conversations I'll even disclose, I had a conversation with your producer once about this, like, hey, do you think she's going to announce today? And I said, no, she's not going to announce today. She wants you guys to all show up at every press event and ask her if she's going to run for governor. And she gets to do that. She gets to string it out for as long as she can. People show up at her events. There's this sort of building anticipation. But then as soon as you announce as a candidate, well, then you're a candidate, and it all changes, and you have to answer different questions, and you have to be accountable for other things, and you have to set up a campaign apparatus, and you have to start spending money. And you don't have to do any of that stuff if nobody else is running, then you don't have to announce early. And then two, you can just wait, and you don't have to spend the money. You don't have to hire a campaign team. You can be, and anytime a reporter asks a legitimate question, which is, hey, how do you feel about X? They can say, well, listen, I'm just a member of Congress right now. I'm not running for office. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not really doing that yet. So it gives you this plausible deniability, which we all know is a lie, right? Like, she's clearly running, they're clearly clearing the field, but it's this sort of game that you play to string it out as long as possible for attention and to save money.
What do you think New Yorkers should know when it comes to political strategies, just in general?
I mean, in general, like, as in, like, what are these candidates thinking about as they're building their campaigns and that sort of thing? Yeah. I mean, so it was interesting because it's pretty clear now that Elise Stefanik is the nominee. I mean, there's Bruce Blakeman, who's a county executive on Long Island, and he has been toying with the idea publicly of running for governor, and he has not said that he's not running. So Republicans still have some work to do if they want Elise Stefanik to be their only candidate in the primary, or to avoid a primary. It was interesting because the Hochul campaign put out a memo, sort of a public strategy memo, that said, this is what we're going to do if we expect Elise Stefanik to be the nominee, and this is how we're going to run a race against her. I think generally speaking, there is the sort of face that a campaign wants the public and wants voters to see. And then there's sort of the other stuff that they're working on. And I don't mean that in like any sort of nefarious, like they're like plotting. That's not what it is. But there are sort of mechanical aspects to running a campaign that the public never sees. And a lot of it deals with how much money are you spending in different platforms, and how are you getting your message out? What is your message? Can you boil down your message into, like, hopefully 3 things, maybe 1 thing? You want to stand for 1 thing. And then how are you going to convince people that that's who you are? But then the other thing is you also have to convince them that your candidate is something as well. So any campaign is 2 things. It is telling your own story and then defining your opponent as something that you want the public to see. So we frequently see this in New York, especially between Democrats and Republicans in statewide races, because usually the calculus is Democrats have a lot of money and Republicans don't. And Democrats are pretty well known, and the Republican is, like, Mark Molinaro is the first name that jumps to my mind, like a well-respected Hudson Valley elected official who ran statewide, and most people around New York had never heard of him. So what did the Andrew Cuomo campaign do? They ran a bunch of ads that were like, here's who Mark Molinaro is if you've never heard of him. And that's the first time most voters had ever heard his name. And even if you know that a political ad is a political ad and it's an attack ad, those ideas get in your brain, and that's what you start to think about a candidate. So those are the things that campaigns are putting together right now. And right now the Hochul campaign is thinking about, how are we going to present Kathy Hochul in the public eye and with our advertising, and how are we going to paint the opponent, whoever that might be?
All right, we'll have to leave it right there. Morgan Hook, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. State officials laying out a plan to increase the standard of living for older New Yorkers. When we return, hear from the State Department of Health on the impact their master plan for aging will have on senior citizens. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. State officials recently laying out a plan to bring renewed support for aging New Yorkers. They announced a master plan for aging, including over 100 proposals to impact aging communities. To learn more about this plan, I spoke with the Commissioner of the Health Department as well as the Acting Director of the Office for Aging. Take a look. So talk about this master plan. What is it for people who have no idea what it is?
Yeah, so let me just give you a general overview. we were asked to do this because of an executive order. And really what it was convening hundreds of different community-based organizations, every single state agency, and private enterprise, to really answer this question: how do we all coordinate so that living in New York is simpler, healthier, and more affordable? How do people age in New York? Really, that's the simplest way of looking at it, and it's a plan with 9 different pillars on it.
And what are those pillars?
Well, there are housing, general community support, long-term care reform, transportation, things like that. And I think to build upon, first of all, I just want to thank Commissioner McDonald for his leadership. You really have to thank the governor, because what we often talk about and don't have is the context. We know what we do, we know how we do it, but we don't talk about why. So if you look at the kind of the preamble to the plan, you know, the governor is one of the few executives in the country that really understands the value of older people. We think of them really from an ageist lens, but she understands that 40% of all the taxes, for example, are paid for by older adults, $72 billion. Their spending supports 6 million jobs. They're the #1 volunteer group, #1 givers to philanthropy. Their pensions pump $40 billion into the economy, Social Security $70 billion. So we want these contributions to stay within the community, and that's really the context behind this. Not only to, you know, help people live independently, because everybody wants to do that, but New York can absolutely be a destination state for retirees. It's a great place to live as a lifelong New Yorker.
Now, I know there's 100 proposals in this plan. What would you say are probably the top 3 most important ones to help those who are aging?
Well,
Go ahead,
you
and then
know,
I'll
I'll tell you this, like, it's a little bit like putting an Amish quilt together. You have all these patches to come together. It really creates an interesting plan. But there's a lot of interesting proposals. And I don't know that I have a favorite or 3, but I think there's some highlights there, right? One is looking at healthcare workforce. You know, healthcare workforce is critical. As we all get older, I can attest to this, you access healthcare more. Caregivers in the home, whether it's informal or formal, there's a lot of interesting proposals in that space. There's some interesting proposals around technology as well. You know, broadband internet access, you need it for commerce, you need it for communication, you need it for entertainment, but there's parts of New York, like the North Country, that don't enjoy broadband internet access. But I think it's important to remember that not every proposal is the state government coming in to solve a problem. This is about community-based organizations and private enterprise helping out as well. There's some wonderful proposals about housing as well as affordability. So there's a lot there, but it's a menu for legislators to pick from. What do you want to put forward as a proposal to maybe be a law? What is some low-hanging fruit that you can do? There's a lot in there for people to pick and choose from.
Yeah, the commissioner's right. I mean, there really isn't one thing. There's a lot of highlights in there because older adults just don't touch our 2 agencies. They touch every single agency, which is really the beauty of this, is engaging all the agencies, and it will wind up being at the county level too, because you can serve people holistically. But we have 4.1 million people who are providing uncompensated care to somebody else. So there's a lot of caregiver proposals. The housing plan, as the commissioner talked about, the governor has a $25 billion 5-year housing plan to bring 880,000 new units. One of the keys, and it was passed in the budget, is to actually invest in community-based services that we know prevent hospitalizations, emergency room visits, observation status, Medicaid spend down, nursing home placement, and that was the most historic investment in my agency, literally in New York State history. So I like the patchwork quilt. There's so many things to really beef up and think about how we change the caring economy that supports people earlier. The prevention agenda just passed. So these are not independent things. These all work together. The Health Across All Policies approach is engaging other agencies to have us all be healthy, because aging starts when you're born, not when you turn a certain age.
Now, how is the state working with local community organizations? What is that partnership like?
Yeah, so the Master Plan for Aging Council still exists, right? So part of this would be like, how do you work with the community-based organizations, private enterprise, local health departments, really anyone who's interested, to find out what are the initiatives you want to do and how do we make this actually happen. But we work with everybody, and I think, you know, it's interesting. I work with Greg a lot. I like working with Greg. This is interesting to me that the state agencies actually get along with each other and work well together. Like, this is one of the things that I like, is when state government actually works together. This topic is so important, and Greg talked a little bit about the prevention agenda. The prevention agenda, which we just announced last week, isn't just about the elderly population, it's about everyone. The prevention agenda is the state health improvement plan, but there's overlap here. You know, we did that with local health departments and hundreds of other community-based organizations, but you really see continuum from birth to the grave. where we're trying to make the state healthy in the long run. And it's not about just being healthy for the sake of being healthy. It's about being healthy across your lifespan and enjoying every day for what you have.
Yeah, and in this process, so just for your audience, what we were charged with is really facilitating a process. These are not proposals that we developed. These are proposals that over 430 stakeholders, through surveys that we did, 2 surveys reaching 140,000 people. So that's what's really being presented here, are proposals that people who do this for a living, residents themselves saying, these are the things that I'm interested in. That's what is really reflective here. And then the next steps are, as the commissioner said, is the legislature will get involved, the stakeholders will continue to be involved, the state agencies will be involved, the councils will be involved. Our network alone works with 1,242 not-for-profits, and many of the folks that are involved in this, again, the net is much wider than that, and we want everybody to be included and as transparent as possible.
And I think part of it too is just getting us to think about aging. I'll give you a simple example. Here's something everybody can do. Most of us have doors in our home and you have to open the door. But when you think about opening a door, as you get older, turning a door knob, a circular door knob, it's just harder. If you have it as a handle, it's really simple. I converted all my doorknobs to handles just because I like the look, but it's just a lot easier to open that doorknob. But it just gets to, like, when you're aging in a home, what do you do so you can age in the home gracefully? Do you need stairs, or can you just make it a zero entry? These are things that we might want to think about as we're constructing home. And it really gets to local government. When you do zoning, how do we do this so it makes sense, thinking about aging? This, to me, is, I think, the power of the Master Plan for Aging, prioritizing those of us who are aging in New York, because they're an important population.
And to that point, that's spot on. The housing stock in New York State is over 60 years old. It wasn't built for children, wasn't built for older adults. So there are proposals in here, again, there's over 100 of them, that actually build smart growth, age-friendly, livable community principles into local planning and zoning, into state policy. And one of our partners we didn't mention, who's been critical, is the New York State Department of State. Paul Byers, the Smart Growth Director, builds these things into local communities and proposals to do that, because enabling housing, community design is really, really important. 70% of all healthcare costs have nothing to do with a health diagnosis or genetics. It has to do with personal choices and the environments you grow up in.
All right, we'll have to leave it right there. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Attention and scrutiny increasing in New York City as ICE continues to make arrests outside Manhattan Immigration Court. When we return, why New York City Mayor Eric Adams is calling for a federal inspection. Hear from immigration advocates calling it too little, too late. There's renewed scrutiny over the holding cells at Immigration Court down in Manhattan and allegations of inhumane conditions. City Mayor Eric Adams drafting a letter demanding the federal government investigate. Reporter Henry Rossoff with Pix 11 in New York City has more from critics saying more could be done.
Make a hall.
As immigration officials continue to make arrests outside Immigration Court, it's where they're taking people next that has increasingly come under fire. Video obtained by the New York Immigration Coalition this week shows dozens held in a small area with hardly bare necessities and only one working toilet. Mayor Adams, who's been hesitant to criticize the Trump administration, especially on matters related to immigration, began reaching out to the federal government Tuesday when the video was released. By late Wednesday night, he had drafted a letter to the General Services Administration, basically the agency which manages buildings for the federal government. The letter says the government's own data suggests people are being held for extended periods of time in these cells. And as we've reported for weeks, local lawmakers have been denied access to inspect the space. And the letter requests the GSA conduct a thorough inspection. Critics of the mayor, like public advocate Jumaane Williams, say he must do more, including attempting to order the fire department and the buildings department to conduct inspections. A spokeswoman for the mayor says the city has no jurisdiction to do this on federal property, and that the public advocate has been told this.
I would like to see something tried and be unsuccessful than to see it not tried at all.
The Department of Homeland Security insists the holding cells only keep people for very short periods of time and denies that poor conditions exist. But the New York Immigration Coalition says these are just blatant lies.
They're playing this game
of roulette of what they can get away with and taking away people's rights.
Stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a bit. If you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X at WTEN. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, we continue to follow the state's response to opioid use. While the CDC recently reported overdose deaths are down, some are concerned about funds the state is using to combat overdoses. Assemblymember Phil Steck suggesting that the state hasn't used all of the funds it received from an opioid lawsuit settlement. Next week, we'll look to hear from the Assemblymember on the actions he'd like to see the state take to address opioid use. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Jamie DeLine. We'll see you here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.